Hi everyone, it's Taylor from Dames a la Mode back for the fourth and final installment of my First Francaise Project. If you haven't seen parts 1 through 3, I'd recommend watching those first so you have a better idea of what's going on, and I'll link to those in the video details below. In the last video I completed making the sleeves and it was time to attach them. I started out by basting the sleeves in, which is the red threads that you can see here, so that I could do an initial fit check and so I didn't have to worry about sewing around pins. Then I backstitched the bottom of the sleeves into the arm's eye. The top half of the sleeve is left open because this is actually going to get fitted right onto your body or onto the dress form if you're doing it yourself like I'm doing here. If you have a friend to help you sew, this is a great place to have them assist you. The extra volume at the top of the sleeve is pleated down towards the back. Ideally, you would do this on the body since your shoulders probably aren't symmetrical. I know mine are not, so there will be variation in how they're pleated. You may have a different number of pleats, and you'll certainly have a different depth of your pleats. The first side always seems like it goes together really evenly for me, and the second part is always really tricky. I try my best to make the pleats look like they're at least symmetrical, but it's really never going to be perfect. Eventually you'll get to a point where it looks decent, but remember, a good fit in the shoulders is a lot more important than it looking perfect. So make sure that you're focusing on the fit over the look. Once I'm happy with how the shoulders look and fit, it's time to sew these down. I'm basically just tacking down the tops of the shoulders to the lining because this will all get sewn down again during the next step. These stitches just help to hold it in place, but I do a few back stitches over the pleats just to hold them in more securely. Alright, the next step in my process is to make the robings for this dress, which are the pieces that are going to come over the shoulder strap and down the front. Now, in the 1760s, if this was a regular dress, these actually would have been made by folding part of the bodice back to make them, but since I didn't have enough fabric, I'm going to have to do fake robings, which are accurate and they did exist for sure. And my silk brocade dress actually has these fake robings. So it's these pieces here, and they just basically come over the shoulder and then just pin down to the front of the bodice. So after you have all of this pinned into your stomacher and over your stays, then the robing comes down and covers that part of it as well, so you can add trim to this. So I'm going to be making these fake applied robings to go over my dress now. The robings that I'm making for my dress are going to be actually really wide because they need to cover this whole section. I have really broad shoulders, so I need a little bit more coverage over the shoulder strap than most people will need. So I'm going to have to kind of fiddle with some of my fabric here because I need to start out with a piece that's 7 inches wide so I can fold it down enough to make it 3.5 inches wide, which will cover the widest spots on my dress here. So I need to go through my pieces and see what I have that is 7 inches wide and about 30 inches long, because that's the amount I need to go from the back here all the way down to the front to the bottom of the bodice. Once the robings are made and pinned into place, they get sewn down over the shoulders. This adds another row of stitching to the tops of the sleeve to help hold them in place, which is why I just tacked them down before. There's no need to do the extra work of sewing them down securely in the first step when they're just going to get sewn down again in the second one. Now that the robings are finished, it's time to make the little back binding piece which covers the raw back edge. I'm sure there's a real name for it, but I actually don't know what it is. I'm making a pattern by using something called Swedish tracing paper here, which is one of my favorite sewing tools. It's a sheer paper that's kind of fabric-like, so it's easy to trace out patterns onto it. It's a miracle tool as far as I'm concerned. And once that piece gets patterned and cut and sewn down, we're in the home stretch of getting this dress done. Finally, it's time to do the hem. So the first step is to even it out. This is a little bit trickier than on a normal dress since this gown is worn over pocket hoops, and that means that the length of the skirt is going to be a little bit different all around the edge. The easiest thing for me to do is just to sit on the ground and start marking. Here I'm putting pins to the length of the floor, and then I'll cut off all the excess below that. And then once the skirts are cut down, I'm going to turn them up twice, iron that little turn, and then I hand stitch the hem using a whip stitch. There's lots of other methods that people do for this, but this is just the one that works best for me. Next, I'm working out the pattern for the cuffs on my sleeves. I'm using the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Sewing for this method, which worked really well. Now this step is weirdly out of order because normally I would have done this at the same time that I made the sleeves and sewn them onto the sleeves before they were set into the dress, so that once they were attached, the sleeves would have been totally done and I didn't have to go back and add the cuffs once the dress was finished. But I was having a little bit of a decision crisis here. In an early video, I talked about my plan to make falling ruffle cuffs for this gown, like these that you see here, but then I decided I wanted a less formal style, so I decided to make them cuffs instead. Again, I used the Swedish tracing paper to make these because it means I can actually test fit on the pattern itself instead of making a separate fabric muslin. It's such a time saver. I love these things. Once I know the scale of them seems right, it's time to make these cuffs. I 100% use the American Duchess method, so I won't rehash it here, but they went together super easily. Once done, these got stitched on, and I will admit I had to redo it once because I sewed them on upside down the first time. And then after a few little finishing stitches here and there, this gown is technically done and wearable. But of course there's the trimming, which always takes 10 times as long as I expect. At this point I was down to just scraps of fabric, so I decided to do a very simple trim, which is happily more typical of mid-century day wear anyway. I used my scallop pinking shears to cut strips, and then I used the whip gather method to create little curls of gathered trim. There is one more annoying step to complete these, and that's as you gather them, they want to curl up on themselves, so it's critical that you use your iron to press them open and flatten them out. Otherwise, they're really difficult to use, and they have more of a closed ruffle look. I really like pressing my trims flat instead of leaving them puffy because I think it looks more like the originals, and I think it just looks better.
Hi! I am in just outside of Seattle, Washington, so I have gone all the way across the country since the last time that you heard from me. And the green dress is still not finished, and I have to wear it tomorrow. So I am here I came out here for a trip. I'm doing a fancy 18th century dinner with some friends, and I'm going to be doing some last minute sewing to get this dress ready to wear. Because, of course, I started it like 2 months ago and it's still not done. I always tend to leave things to the last minute no matter how much time I give myself. So this is pretty typical for me. I've been in this situation many times before. Luckily, what I need to do is actually very, very simple. So basically the stomacher is not decorated and I have not yet applied the ruche trims to the robings. So I'm just gonna be doing some decorating. Hopefully this is enough of these little ruches. It's just whipped gathered. I do have some extra pieces with me as if I do need to do some fill-in though, but we'll see how this goes.
All of these trims are just being basted down. You don't need to put a lot of work or effort into this part because they aren't going to be under any strain, so it's not like they need to be back stitched down or stitched down with really strong stitching. They get tacked down to the robings in a serpentine shape and down the stomacher, and I've mixed that with some lovely lace that I had in my stash. And now it's time to start getting ready. I'm amazed that I finished this in time. And happily for me, I was there with my pal Jenny LaFleur, who did a beautiful hairstyle for me, complete with hair powder.